the 4 agreements. So I thought that these things were just obvious life lessons. For as long as I have been spiritual on the path of life, and even before that, just the people that I was around taught me this as obvious life lessons, but apparently they are becoming less and less obvious. So I felt like it was time to talk about it. What's up, guys? I'm Ann Blackwood, your Silicon Valley sage sister, here to bring consciousness to the forefront of your daily life to make life a little kinder and simpler. The 4 Agreements is a book that I was surprised to find maybe 3 months ago. I thought it was really cool to hear that there was a book about this. The 4 Agreements, for those of you who don't know what they are to be impeccable with your word, to not make assumptions, to not take anything personally, and the last one is to always do your best. And to me, I don't know if it was just the way I was raised, but these just seem like obvious things to me. They seem like obvious life lessons. They don't even seem to me like spiritual rules, per se. To me, they seem obvious, I guess. And so I found it really interesting that there was a book about it at all, not because I would expect there shouldn't be, but because what I've noticed is more and more recently, these things appear to be less and less obvious to others. So I wanted to talk about each individual agreement of the 4 agreements and how they tie into what I talk about on a regular basis. So first of all, be impeccable with your word. Truth and honesty is so important. I talk about how honesty is important, I want to say, in several videos. I definitely talk about it in the Sanctuary. For those of you who don't know, I have my official VIP group, which is called the Sanctuary of the Awakened. You can sign up for that through my Patreon. Truth and honesty is very important. I just did a video on this recently. Because when it comes down to it, I forget which video it's in now, when it comes down to it, when you lie to people, you are giving them a false perception of who you are, let alone a false perception of reality. So being impeccable with your word has to do with honesty and truth, but it also has to do with being mindful of what you say. People don't stop to be mindful in general, and being mindful in general is really important. And being mindful with your word, making sure you're saying exactly what you mean to be saying, is important. To be able to stop and think first before you say something is important, so that you're actually saying what you mean, rather than just blurting out something, which we've all done that before, and then realize that what we said was just kind of what came out, but wasn't really what we actually meant, and that we had to then break it down, maybe in a more complicated way, but we had to break it down further, because the simple words that came out of emotion weren't actually exactly what we meant, or at the very least, the way we said them was not what we meant based on the way the other person interpreted them. So it's very important to be impeccable with your word, because you want to make sure that what you're saying accurately, to the best of your ability, communicates what you're trying to say. So then if the other person misunderstands, you know that you've communicated it to the best of your ability in a sentence that if you are going to break it down, or if you're going to explain it any further, it needs to be broken down. And that it's not about what you said that they don't understand, but that you now understand you don't have the same understanding of what things mean. And this happens all the time, and people don't realize it. What words mean in what context, what things mean in what context. You could even say the same 2 words, and depending on the context, they mean different things. So I want to say I've brought this up in another video where I was having a conversation with my significant other, and we were talking about something someone said to him. And he thought it was really obvious what that meant. And I said, well, depending on how he said it, how he meant it, it could have meant this. And then we got into a whole conversation about what this other person meant. And unfortunately, we couldn't ask them. But it was very clear that what he said wasn't actually obvious, because depending on the context, when I was there, or had I been there, and depending on the context, I could have taken it very differently than how someone else took it. Using all the same words, body language matters, vocal tone matters. So at the very least, you can be impeccable with your word, because everything else is also going to play a role. And it takes time to learn how to be consciously aware of all of it. So if you can just start with being impeccable with your word, that's a good place to start. Be honest. Be truthful. Seek out the truth. Seek out the facts. And take the time to stop and think before you say things, and really think about what you have to say before you say things. All right, number 2, don't take things personally. So this relates to the unshakable inner peace that I talk about. This also relates to confidence, because being able to not take things personally can be really hard for people, because it's hard for people to understand that it's not about you. It's about the person you're communicating with. It's about the person you're interacting with. It's not about you. Not really. I mean, some of it can be about you. Some of it can come about because of you. But in the grand scheme of things, I have a meme that I'm going to be putting out after this. It says, if you understood how often people project onto others as a coping mechanism, you would stop taking things personally. And that's true, because people project all the time. Solipsism is this thing where, as kids, we think that because we know it, everybody else must know it. But we're supposed to grow out of that. And that's kind of how you can tell that as the generations go by, we are having more and more delayed maturation, where people are becoming less and less mature all the time, because we're supposed to grow out of that solipsism. We're supposed to understand that my perspective is not necessarily your perspective. Your perspective is not necessarily my perspective. Just because I know it doesn't mean it's going to be obvious to you. And just because you know it doesn't mean it's obvious to me. That's why I love Jordan Peterson's rule for life, which is to assume that the person you're talking to knows something you don't. Love it. Because even if you take that into the context of not knowing, most people hear that and they think, oh, well, that you're saying I'm supposed to assume that person knows more than me. It's not about more. It's about something you don't. Assume that if you're talking to somebody about something and they're insisting, especially, but even if they're not, assume they know things you don't. Why that's hard for people, I don't understand. We all know things that others don't. That's what being a specialist is all about. I'm going to know more things about psychology than someone watching my video because I went to school for psychology. Someone who went to school for psychology even more than I did might know more than me. But someone else is going to know more about plumbing or automotive work than maybe I do. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. It's perfectly okay for people to know things you don't. It's perfectly okay for people to know more than you even. This is why it's so important to not take things personally, because as I said in another video of mine recently, being able to admit that you don't, that was my last bi-monthly energy update. If you can admit you don't know something, when you don't know something, you actually open up the door to learning it. As where if you don't admit you don't know it and say that you do, you actually keep yourself from learning. And why would you want to do that? And taking things personally prevents you from being able to recognize that it's not about you, and that whatever anybody is going to think about you, that's on them. And if really they think that poorly of you because you maybe don't know something, they're probably not your people anyway. Which brings me to don't make assumptions. You know, I talk about curiosity with my Sanctuary of the Awakened, especially. The thing that I say at the end of my Sanctuary videos is be brave, stay sane, stay curious, and be kind to each other. And that's because being curious is important. Very, very important. Rather than assuming that you know something, if you assume that you don't, you can then look it up, and you'll either find out that you do know it, and then maybe also learn something new, or find out something new. Who cares? You've got to ask yourself, why does it hurt so badly to admit that you could be mistaken? Because honestly, in the grand scheme of things, if we can admit that we're mistaken, that also admits that we're starting to figure out what's right. You know, if you figured out what's wrong, then you should have a good idea of what's right at that point. So admitting that you were mistaken also admits that you're leveling up. All admitting a mistake is saying, I was there then, now I'm here. That's all it is. So being able to take the time to digest the fact that it is okay to not know everything. It's okay. Both of these they tie into each other. Not taking things personally and not making assumptions, because it's all about being able to admit that it's okay not to know something. You know, and again, just because something is one way in one place doesn't mean it's that way in another place. That's why assumptions are so dangerous. It prevents you from figuring out what the truth is. And why would you want to do that to yourself? Why would you want to hide from the truth? The truth will set you free. Truly. So we want to be very, very careful not to just operate off of assumptions, because those can get us into some deep trouble. You're always better off saying, okay, this is what I know now, and if that's not enough, let's wait and find out. Or let's proceed as we are and wait to find out. You are always going to be better off. Always, always, always better off admitting that you don't know everything, figuring out what you can figure out, and be comfortable with understanding that it might take some time to learn the rest. If you don't get how that absolutely connects to the last year and a half, well, you'll know if you know. But yeah, it's important. It's very, very important not to make assumptions, because especially in this day and age, when every answer to everything is at our fingertips, if you're just willing to dig, if you're just willing to ask. You have no reason to be willfully ignorant except denial. And honestly, when it comes down to it, that's a very sad and lonely place to be. In the light, in the truth, is such a liberating place to be that I can't more highly recommend it. Truly. Being able to know the limitless potential that we all have to learn, grow, expand, heal, just by being able to admit, I know some things, but I don't know everything. I know a little bit about what I don't know, and there's a whole lot I don't know about what I don't know. And that's okay. That's okay. As well, being stubborn and not being willing to just look something up, going back to the whole don't make assumptions thing, which is the agreement we're at. Why make yourself, like I did this to myself when I was trying to get the gas out of the car. For those of you who don't know, I got rear-ended in somebody else's car, and I had just filled it with an entire tank of gas to give it back to the person who owned it. So I decided, since I was rear-ended and they weren't going to be able to drive the car anyway, I would keep the car in my driveway and try to get the gas out. And instead of just watching a whole video, it frustrated me because I ended up going to Home Depot like 3 times because I wasn't just paying attention, and instead I was making assumptions. And it's very rare that I do this. So I was really annoyed with myself. Really annoyed with myself because I was assuming I understood how it was working. And in the end, it didn't work anyway, and I had to do something else. But had I just watched the video all the way through, rather than just kind of looking at it for a moment and being like, oh, I get how that works, I would have only made 1 trip to Home Depot before I called my mechanic. And then it would have taken me a day and a half, rather than 4 days to get the gasoline out of the car. Perfect example of why you don't want to make assumptions, because you are going to cost yourself all sorts of things that you otherwise didn't have to. All right, and last but not least, always do your best. And this comes down to self-care as well as motivation, because there are some days where our best that day might not be our best on other days, but it's still our best. And if we know we're always doing our best, we have nothing to fear. Truly. When we know we're doing our best, no amount of criticism can get to us because we know we did our best. And that's all that matters. Being able to take that time to have that understanding of being able to take the time to do your best all the time. Forgive yourself if you're not, but doing your best to do your best all the time gives you the freedom to let all the naysayers off the hook, all the people with judgment off the hook. Because when you know you're doing your best, and I've got a whole video, I think, on this, or it's in a video. I know I talked about this, I want to say 9 months to a year ago now. When you know, and that's all that matters, is that you are doing your best all the time. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, because you know you're doing your best. And that's what matters. I don't know any way else to say that. You're taking care of yourself first and foremost. You're doing your best with yourself. And then you're doing your best from there out in the world. That's all you can do is your best. So as long as you're making sure that you are putting your best foot forward and doing your best every day to the best of your ability, there's nothing you can do better. And so there's nothing for you to complain about. And there's nothing for anybody else. Well, people can complain about things, but you don't have to listen. So doing your best is important, because when we know we're doing our best, everything else sort of falls by the wayside, because your best is all you can do. So nothing else matters. I want to say I had one other thing I wanted to say about that.
A few moments later.
Whatever it was, I don't remember now. So, my ears are a little itchy because I was wearing earrings yesterday that I forgot and don't agree with my ears. So yeah, that's the 4 agreements. Be impeccable with your word. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take things personally. Don't make assumptions. Always do your best. If you use nothing else to live your life by, those alone got me so far without even knowing the 4 agreements was even a thing. I didn't even know it was a book. Had no idea. I learned all of those things on my own. So when I saw it was a book, I was like, huh, cool. That's awesome. Somebody else came to the same conclusion that the people who taught me when I was younger came to. That's awesome. So yeah, I guess that's where we wrap it up. All right, guys. Thank you very much for joining me for another video. Don't forget to check out the links in the description. We are still doing our fundraiser, so please keep sharing, and thank you to all who have donated. I am going to be doing an update video for that shortly, so stay tuned for that. Thank you. Keep sharing. Keep donating. We're making a miracle happen in real life. For those of you who don't know, I got rear-ended in somebody else's car, as I was just explaining, and I realized that the best possible outcome, because I talk all the time about best possible outcomes, I realized the best possible outcome would be being able for him to get his first ever new car, because his old junky car got rear-ended. But in order for that to happen out of this situation, more money was needed. So I had to figure out how I was going to do that, because I don't have $10,000 laying around. I wish I did, but even I have bills. So I said, I have some money to put towards it, and I know that there are at least 2,000 people who would be willing to put $5 towards it. And I was right. Most people have given $10, $20 towards it. So we're making it happen. But we've got a big goal, so we still got a little ways to go. Otherwise, there's my Patreon links. There's my mailing list link. I do 1 email a month. That's it. August is about to come out. I'm getting tired, can you tell? August is about to come out. Definitely get in on that, because I've got some exciting news coming out in the next couple of days that I'll be sharing in the mailing list email. So yeah. And remember, subscribe. If you haven't already, subscribe, because I want that custom URL. And I promise I'll stop talking about it once I do. All right, guys, may the energy you serve you well, and let's keep making our way through.